Well, it's very worrying in democratic countries when we see attacks on journalists, killings, disappearances.
Restos mortais são do jornalista inglês Dom Phillips.
E o indigenista Bruno Araújo foram mortos,
esquartejados, queimados e enterrados.
Freedom of the press, the safety of journalists are fundamental to the democratic process, to the democratic society. It's not only the right of journalists to express themselves. The freedom is also the right of society to know what is happening. To get good fact-based journalism is therefore an essential part of the democratic process. And that is why when journalists are attacked and killed, and when there is impunity for the killing of journalists in democratic countries, it is something that we should worry about because it means democracy is being undermined.
We have seen in the last few months several journalists were killed in Ukraine, and we also saw the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot in the West Bank, all very tragic episodes. But the violence against journalists is not restricted to conflict situations. More and more, we are seeing countries like India, Brazil, Hungary, Turkey, and the Philippines that are experiencing growing threats against journalists and free speech.
Recently, a journalist disappeared with an environmental activist. We know that in Mexico, since the beginning of this year, around 9 or more journalists have been killed. We know that 10 journalists have been killed in Ukraine, but when we see this happening in countries like Mexico or Brazil, then the death of every journalist under these circumstances is a signal, a symptom of an attack on democracy. That is why it is so important that these killings are properly investigated and those who have committed the crimes are prosecuted and punished.
Political leaders in countries like Brazil, the Philippines, Hungary, Turkey, I could go on and on, India, Nicaragua, they have been systematically attacking the press and trying to discredit and intimidate journalists. How should we deal with this?
And those of us who believe in democracy believe that if you are going to be in public office, then you are going to be scrutinized. There's the right, the media has the right, the public have the right to scrutinize your behavior, and you cannot turn around and attack them for that. But unfortunately, that is exactly what is happening. It's very dangerous. Sometimes those statements denouncing the press by the leader, the prime minister, or the president, or other people in power, can lead to threats. Other people then feel emboldened to attack. Maria Ressa, who received the Nobel Peace Prize last year, together with Dmitry Muratov of Russia, Maria Ressa was attacked by her president in the Philippines so many times, and that endangered her. As a result of that, she then received threats, physical threats, online threats, and there are many, many examples of that.
I didn't know if I was going to be here today. Every day, I live with the real threat of spending the rest of my life in jail because I'm a journalist.
Under international law, political speech is protected for democratic reasons. So if you have political debates, you should not be censored. A politician should not be censored. But on the other hand, the politician has a responsibility not to use that power to attack the media, because then they are misusing the power. They're weaponizing political speech in order to attack media and reduce the space for others to scrutinize what they're doing as politicians.
You have some of the extreme right-wing activists that use freedom of speech as a weapon. They say, that moderation, content moderation, or moderation against hate speech is actually censorship. What is freedom of speech in a world where the public square is dominated by internet platforms and speech can be weaponized in social media?
Disinformation and misinformation has existed from ancient times. What is happening today with digital technology is the power of amplification. It is not that I go down to the town square and I scream a lie. whatever I say on Twitter will go to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, depending on the size of the Twitter account. That's very dangerous, not just because information is false. False information is not illegal under international law. You can lie. That's okay, because your lie might be my truth. So the judgment of what is true or false is not important. What is important is whether there is harm because of what you've said. If you say something that will harm people, that will cause damage, that might be inciting hatred and violence against minorities or LGBTQI people, or telling lies that will distort elections, that is very dangerous. You see, under international law, freedom of expression is a very important right. It's a very wide right, but it's not an absolute right. There are restrictions. And one of the restrictions is you can restrict speech when it's likely to hurt or harm other people's reputation or other people's rights. Now, some people, when they are being accused by journalists, for example, we just talked about politicians, but there have been others, businessmen, for example, what they do is they turn around and they sue the journalist for defamation and demanding huge punitive damages. So a poor journalist who barely earns enough to survive suddenly finds themselves facing this huge big case, or a newspaper company case can be brought against a newspaper company, and if they lose that case, they will end up in jail. The European Union, for example, what they're doing now is they're introducing a law that would reduce this risk of a slap. In some countries, there are rules about not being allowed to seek punitive damages. So yes, as a journalist, you may get your facts wrong, but if you're not malicious, if you haven't deliberately done that to hurt someone, you should be protected, because otherwise you will never dare to publish anything. Your editor will never allow you to publish anything, because if you make a slight mistake, the whole newspaper goes out of business. But if you make it in good faith, if you correct it once the fact has been proven, then you should not have to go through this kind of punitive measure judgment that will destroy your life, your livelihood, but perhaps also the media company's livelihood.
How prevalent is gender-based violence online? How big a problem is it? And what is effective against this?
First of all, there is online violence. Many people seem to doubt that. But certainly the psychological harm that is done when, for example, there are, and the online violence against women tends to be very sexual, very coordinated, very painful. Sometimes it transfers into harm in the offline world. And there are many real cases of women journalists being threatened online, and then they receive threats in real life as well, and sometimes even get killed. So it is very alive. It is particularly high for women politicians, women journalists, women leaders, women in the public sphere. It happens in other situations as well, but these women are particularly attacked in order to scare them off the platforms. And in this day and age, if you have a public profile and you have to be on platform. As a journalist, you have to be on the platform, because otherwise you cannot do your job. And the idea here is to use so much violence that you're pushed off. Now, that has to be, first of all, that has to be taken seriously, both by platforms and by the state. Platforms, there's a lot they can do to protect women and to help women to protect themselves. For example, through particular mechanisms that allow you to switch off or to block certain types of people accessing your account. And those are simple things, but also through other means, platforms can actually protect women, reduce it. When you see one account that's constantly abusing women, and there are patterns to the way in which attacks take place. It's not just one single attack or 5 attacks, there will be thousands. So you can detect. And on the state's government side, they need to realize that online violence against women is as dangerous as offline violence. You are not allowed to make rape threats in the offline world. You should not be allowed to make them online either. Therefore, the legal system, the judicial system, the social service systems, these have to be open to providing women help when they need it. Well, digital technology has brought a lot of advantages to journalists. You are able to collect more data faster. Your journalists are able to carry out investigative journalism in a way in which they were not able to in the past because of technology. You're able to communicate with many more people, your audience, readers, but also on the other side, across the world, journalists are collaborating on many projects. So that's the positive side of it. On the negative side, of course, I think first and foremost, what we should worry about is the disinformation and misinformation that is available on the digital media platforms. And that means that people can no longer trust information. They don't know what is fact and what is false. And as a result of that, they begin to distrust all information, and that has an impact on journalists. There is also, of course, on the business side, digital media platforms are controlling what people read and what people see through their algorithms. And that means that the reader believes the reader is making the choice, but the reader is not making the choice. And that means that, in a sense, the platforms have some kind of an editorial power in controlling what gets to the readers. And then, of course, there is the whole issue of advertising and the revenue that is now going to the digital platforms rather than to traditional media. Fact-based journalism, independent journalism, that is a really powerful tool against disinformation and misinformation. So I would say no censorship of content by governments, but some rules about the transparency and clarity of what platforms are doing. The other thing that platforms can also do is, WhatsApp, for example, has done that because that's encrypted. So if there is false news, dangerous news circulating on WhatsApp, you cannot, the WhatsApp itself cannot moderate the content. But what they do is they've cut down the reach. You have the right to speech, but you don't have the right to reach. So if you are going to spread harmful false information, that can be controlled also so that it does not spread very far.